writing, distressing, resenting, and respecting. Before I started typing up this piece, I had a phone conversation with my mom. I'm thinking, was that yesterday or was that this morning? I think it was actually yesterday. And then when I woke up this morning, I was thinking about it, and I wrote this piece. Later in the piece, I say more about the conversation and history with my mom, and also with my son's mom. Some history regarding my son's mom. I will be talking about distress and resentment and respect. But before I get into any of those details, I'm going to talk about writing. Now I'll begin reading the blog. I write. Right now, I'm writing this. What is the purpose and value of writing? Writing is quite different from talking. Talking around other people, even if only talking out loud to myself. I may have an immediate concern with someone else's experience of the communication, because they can hear what I'm saying. Plus, there's the possibility of dialogue. Even if I'm saying nothing and I'm around other people, they can start talking to me. Possibility of dialogue is right there when other people are around. Writing, especially when I go off into private, into seclusion and writing is very different. It's not likely that I'll be interrupted. I can turn off the phone and so on. So there's certainly unique value in talking, like the value of dialogue and conversation and interaction, just as there's value in things like posting to Facebook or sharing in a Yahoo group or sending out emails to people, all those forms of communication and dialogue are uniquely valuable. However, with writing, I can organize a sequence of thoughts without any interruption. There's also unique value in this. Not just a chat room or something where people can see every keystroke, or where it's Twitter or something and I can only say very short messages, but something where I could take weeks, months, years, however long I want to organize some sequence of words, some sequence of thoughts before sharing it with others. Sometimes I've been on the phone with someone and one of the two people, them or me, has talked for several minutes without any dialogue. Talking in person, there are more signals of interest and attention than when talking on the phone. During classroom lectures and long church sermons, people may have so little engagement that they fall asleep and start snoring, or that they just have side conversations. It's also very common in classrooms. Have you ever been on a phone call in which one of the people actually fell asleep? I'm sure you've been on phone calls in which someone put you on hold or had a side conversation, but have you ever been on a phone call in which one of the people actually fell asleep? On the phone, one long-winded speaker can go on and on for several minutes before realizing that there has been no interest or attention for quite a while. In fact, the phone call may have ended. Maybe the transmitting of the voice on the phone call has been inactive for a while, and then a dial tone suddenly interrupts an entirely one-sided conversation. I don't know if conversation would be the right word. An entirely one-sided sequence of talking. That can be quite disappointing when the dial tone is heard and one recognizes there's nobody there. You say something like, I've been the one speaking on occasion when I said, "Are you there? Is anybody there? Are you there?" And then I realized apparently there's no one there. Other times, especially with cell phones, the phone call will abruptly stop, and the other person may not know that, and then they'll call me back and say, "Did you hang up on me?" And I'll say, "Nope, my signal dropped, or yeah, I hung up on you, or what, or I fell asleep while we're talking, or whatever it is. Anyway, that can be disappointing. It can be funny, but it can be disappointing as well, frustrating, infuriating, frightening. I can worry about losing the interest of the other person. Did I make them mad? All those kind of things. So when writing, I can explore my interests without concern for anyone else's interests. I don't care if you're interested, because I'm just writing. I'm doing it until I'm done. And if other people want my attention, they can come ask. They can come get it. Until then, I have the seclusion or the privacy or the focus on writing. And when people try and interrupt me when I'm writing, sometimes that doesn't go too well for them. Sometimes they're disappointed at how that results. Other times it's fine. Sometimes I welcome it. I'll be like, oh, this is great. Phone call, whatever it may be. So I write about what interests me. I don't have to be concerned with anyone in particular's interest as I'm writing. I write what interests me, even if what interests me is connecting to one or more people in particular ways, as in influencing them. I've written radio ads and lots of literature for commercial purposes, for promoting a business, my own business, someone else's business. Lots of times I am interested in a particular outcome and particular people responding. I'm writing an email to a particular person, a proposal for a particular contract. Other cases, I'm writing out of my own interest. I don't even know the outcome of what I'll be experiencing after I write and as I write. I'm writing for the experience of writing sometimes. So if I write something and share it, then if it is interesting to someone else in particular, they can read some of it or all of it, all of what I wrote. They can read it all at once, or read it in sections, or even read it more than once. Read it twice, read it 7 times, whatever. I write songs. So if I write a song and record a song, many times people will listen to the same song lots and lots of times. They'll request it. If I'm performing it live, they'll hear a recording and play it a lot. I've played lots of recordings lots of times. So do other people. I've read some books. I've seen some movies multiple times and read some books multiple times. Not a lot of books and not a lot of movies, but some of them. If someone is not interested in something I wrote, I might not ever find out. I don't necessarily get feedback from every single person who finds something I wrote uninteresting or confusing or too complicated for them or too boring for them. People typically don't put a lot of effort into expressing their lack of interest in something because they're not interested. Why would they be interested in listing the things they're not interested in? If somebody does tell me how uninteresting they found something of mine, song, a writing, whatever it may be, I'm always curious, or I can be sometimes curious as to why are they interested in telling me that they're not interested. Kind of like calling up somebody and saying, I don't want to talk to you. So if someone reads something of mine and they find it frightening or otherwise unappealing, again, I might not ever know. I have gotten feedback from people who found something, disturbing, and I generally wasn't surprised that it would be disturbing to some people. There's some things that I've been specifically skeptical and hesitant to publish and to publicize that I've distributed to one person or 5 or 10 people, and perhaps that's it. That's all. So I can write something for myself, like I complete the writing process for the experience of writing. I've got it written, and then I revise it for someone else. Or then I record an audio like this and I make some additional comments. That initial writing process organizes my thought, clarifies my thoughts, and then gives me a script from which to read and from which to elaborate and ad-lib, to add things. So I can write something for myself, then revise it for someone else in particular or some group. Maybe I research a subject thoroughly and organize all of my notes into a thick file of many folders, but from all of that material, then I make a very brief outline for a proposal to submit to a publisher. I'm just going to focus on a couple highlights and leave out 99% of the material, and I'm just going to give you an outline. Or maybe I write a simplified summary piece for children, focusing on dramatic highlights, simple to relate to, easily visualized, and so on. And then leave out any obscure references or complex themes, because I'm writing for children. I want it to be short and simple and accessible. I make sure that my terminology is relatively elementary. Or I write or interact with some person in particular. If I write something, then I talk to someone about it. I'm going to talk to if I talk to a few different people about one thing I've written, I'll probably say some slightly different things to the different people based on what I know about them and their interests. So maybe I write a private correspondence to someone that I know has certain interest and familiarity with certain details. If I'm talking to them or writing to them, I'm going to cater what I say or inform how I write by my expectations about them. Those expectations could be wrong. They could be presumptions that are inaccurate, but that's what informs my presentation. What am I interested in? I'm interested in their response. In that case, that particular person's response, a certain outcome. In other cases, I'm just writing to explore my own experience, for introspection, for personal development. So all of those variations of writing are informed by the original private process of making all of my notes and organizing them. In other words, any communication that I make after writing is informed by the writing, the research, and then the organizing of my thoughts. So I organize my thoughts, and then every communication that I make from then on, everything that I say or write is informed by everything I've ever written before, everything I've ever read before, every conversation I've ever had. So over time, it is possible for me to refine my presentation, refine my understanding and comprehension, refine my fluency, refine my delivery, and be a more effective writer, a more effective communicator, even a more effective listener. Because I'm familiar with language from my own experience, I can empathize and analyze and intuit what's going on for someone as they're speaking or as they're writing, if I've written similar things or if I've been exposed to similar things as a reader. So after writing, or even during a long writing process, I may have conversations with people. And those conversations will be informed by what I've been writing about, what I am writing about. And perhaps part of researching the content will be to have conversations with people. I maybe want to test out some people's response and interest to what I'm writing. Or perhaps get some feedback as to how various people respond to the content that is of interest to me. And they're responding to the various presentations that I do. Maybe I'll show them a short version and a longer version. In professional writing for business, I will often provide somebody 2 drafts, or sometimes I'll provide people, 2 different drafts or 2 different subject lines for the same email, so that they can consider how do we want to label this whole thing in terms of a subject line. Writing, I can actually invent an audience, as in one that may not even currently exist. I can certainly imagine things about an audience when talking as well. But any actual people may interrupt and present a different audience than the one I had been imagining. So in writing, I can preserve my own imaginary audience. I might even change the audience as I go, but that's me without the influence of other people. So writing is a process when I'm withdrawing from the influence of other people. or that can be part of the process of writing. Typically, especially, a lot of writers are reclusive, at least during their writing process. So whether I'm writing for a radio ad of 30 seconds in length, or writing a novel, not that I've ever written a novel, but whatever I'm writing, I might withdraw from the immediate influence of other people, withdraw into privacy and seclusion to focus on writing. Focus on what kind of purpose do I want to bring to the writing process? What kind of audience do I have? What kind of response and outcome do I want to produce? And how can I put the subject line on the email to attract a certain kind of audience that fits with the outcome I have in mind and fits with the rest of the process? I can write a letter to myself at a different age, like decades older than I am or decades younger than I am. I can make up myself as an audience, but myself at a different age, an imaginary self. Sure, I used to be 10 years old or 15 years old, but it's still imaginary now to talk about myself at 15 or myself at 10. I can write a letter to someone who's been dead for a while, maybe centuries, maybe someone I'd never met. They've been dead for millennia or centuries. I can imagine writing to a group of people who have not been born yet. I can make up any audience. I can imagine writing to a cat. I can imagine writing to my desk, or writing to my leg, or writing to a forest, as if they were a character, a human. Mythology takes lots of things that are not human and or may not be human, and puts them in stories, puts those natural phenomenon into stories that personify some natural process. The thunderbolts are maybe interpreted as a particular god is angry with the humans, and that's why they do the frightening thunderbolts and the lightning and so forth. That's a really common story that people might tell to children, like a fairy tale or whatever it may be. A lot of times when modern people look back at the myths of other cultures, they don't consider that those myths could be children's stories. They could be like criticizing those cultures for believing in things that were not necessarily literally believed in. Would the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus be the defining features of our society if someone looks back on it from a long time and say, yeah, they worshipped an Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Wow, these were some really crazy people. Can you believe that? They worship chocolate Easter bunnies. I can't believe they thought those things were real. Well, just because we have a picture of an Easter bunny or a picture of a little, bunny coming out of an egg or whatever, that could be an author's creative license. That could be kind of for fun. That could be fictitious, and the author might know it. And eventually the people exposed to the story might know it too. Maybe not immediately. Maybe they're supposed to believe it. Part of the joke and part of the intrigue is that it sounds believable at first, and then eventually they realize, wait, that was a joke. Oh, wow. That's interesting to tell jokes sometimes. So I can write as if I were someone else other than who I am, someone real or imaginary. I can pretend to be some other author. I've actually done that several times. I maybe a few weeks ago I wrote something, and then after the end of I think after I wrote it, I said it was by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, and I did that because of the content, because it was funny to say that it was by Oliver North, and I wrote that he wrote it. I wrote that he wrote it in 1977, which was just a joke. Anyway, I can invent a new character to be the author of whatever I'm writing. I can Make it an imaginary character. I don't have to take some, I don't have to say some existing character like Santa Claus or Oliver North. I can make up an entirely new character, like Darth Vader was made up by someone at some time. They just made up this character. So originally, when I sat down first to write this content a while ago, I was thinking of writing something to my mom. I told you that at the very beginning of the audio, and I'm going to tell you more about that. So far, most of what I've written has probably been most interesting for people who are themselves writers, and I presume that my mom probably would not label herself a writer. On average, writers may be some of the most introspective people, even some of the most reclusive people. I'm writing this for sharing with and connecting with people who are not afraid of introspection, who are open to it, not afraid of introspection or honesty, who may even value it and seek out introspective honesty, may be intrigued by it, fascinated by it, and inspired by it. Anyone else who started reading this or even listening to this audio probably hasn't kept reading up to this point, right? This is people who are writers or who are into introspection or who are readers and really appreciate writers. Those are the kind of folks who probably are still listening or still reading. The prior content might be considered a filter, a barrier, a hook to grab them, a gimmick, a test, and all of the above. It attracts certain people and repels certain people. And that's always the case in all writing. In fact, in all communication. Not everyone is going to respond the same. Not everyone's going to respond at all. So my first thought before writing this was that I began to explore writing as a way to explore conversations that were not happening in person in my life. Like they weren't happening with my mom. She was one of the most common people, that I would most often interact with in my life because she was around me more than most anyone else. When I was very young, I wanted to interact with people, and a variety of people. People who were interested in the things I was interested in. People like me, the same level of vocabulary and all that. I was very interested in interacting with people. But my sister was several years older than me, and she went to school, so she was gone during the weekdays when I would still be at home. And my mom was there. In many cases, I was around my mom. And she was the only person around to interact with. But she did many things besides interacting with me. She had a lot of other focuses and priorities besides interacting with me, like all the time. Like, the average 3-year-old will interact with an adult for long periods of time if the adult is, responsive to that. A lot of little kids will ask, okay, read me another book. Okay, now read that book again. Okay, read me another book. Okay, now put me on your shoulders again. And the little kids can ask for a lot of attention. So one of the ways that I tried to get attention from my mom when she wasn't giving me attention was throwing tantrums. That's right. Another way to get her attention was to do something that would predictably make her mad. I would get mad and throw a tantrum, throw things around. Sometimes that would make her mad. Stop damaging stop making a mess of the clothes, or making a mess of the laundry, or stop, whatever. Doing something that would get her attention. There are a variety of things that would work consistently to get my mom's attention. And eventually, they might not work as well. Or I might find other things that work better. Those methods worked well enough for me to repeat them for a while. Until I stopped repeating them, until maybe she no longer responded how I wished, how I valued. So there were also many times when I did not want to interact with my mom at all, as in because of fear of her and her response. So I wanted to attract her attention in certain ways, get certain outcomes, and at certain times I wanted to cease interacting with her to avoid certain outcomes. I wanted things like acceptance and interest and connection and joy and mutual respect and affection, not rejection and dismissal and outbursts of distress. At various times, I got all of those things with my mom, and I began to cultivate certain dynamics and avoid certain others. Everyone has sometime been around other people who were in some amount of distress. As a child, other people's distress can be frightening. People in distress can be negligent or even abusive. It is a very predictable thing that children or even adults would withdraw from someone experiencing a certain level of distress. People in intense distress may be drugged to subdue them, or isolated into jails and mental institutions, or simply killed to prevent them from injuring other people. My mom was sometimes upset when I was a teenager that I did not talk with her more. Maybe you could even add that she was upset that she didn't have the social support that she valued, and she turned to her teenage son, me, and I wasn't providing that social support that she valued, and no one else was either. And I was there, so she was upset with me. I might spend a lot of time playing guitar when I was a teenager, and since then I might have spent a lot of time playing guitar and writing songs, talking on the phone to other people, but then when my mom wants to talk to me, I'm not responsive, or I'm dismissive, or I'm withdrawing from her conversation, or avoiding conversation. And my mom might notice those things. She might ask me a few questions. I might or might not even respond to her questions. I might actually ignore her questions and ignore her speaking. I might go out of my way to avoid her, or at least to avoid talking to her. Maybe I would go around with headphones on all the time, or my stereo playing real loud. How many teenagers play their stereo loud as a way of kind of creating a boundary between them and other people? Not just to enjoy the music, certainly to enjoy the music, but it also, have you ever played music that your parents didn't like, and you played it a little bit more often maybe because they didn't like it, and they told you they didn't like it, and you maybe wanted to annoy them just a little bit, not throw a tantrum, not turn it up too loud, not play the stuff that's too disturbing to them, but maybe disturb them just a little. I don't know if any other teenagers might have ever done anything like that. Okay, I do know. Lots of other teenagers have done exactly what I'm talking about. So we want to, as teenagers, especially young boys, may want to dissociate themselves from their mom, remove, like create a gap between them and their mom, especially if they've been considered mama's boys. So at a certain age, those mama's boys are going to want to cut the apron strings, or be independent of their mothers, or independent of their parents, or independent of everyone, whatever it may be. And I just mentioned mama's boys because that was my experience as a younger child, that I had a lot of association with my mom, a lot of interaction with her. And as time went on, she and I both had the experience of dealing with the transition away from being so close, so intimate. As time went on, I had virtually no intimacy with my mom in terms of like her knowing what was going on in my life. I would intentionally create a boundary or barrier so as not to reveal myself to her, or to maybe to anyone. The words like I put up a wall, or I put on some armor. Well, these are the things that many people will experience at various times. They create boundaries. And so that's a big part of my teenage years, was withdrawing from my mom, creating a gap or even a chasm between her and myself. I might have gone out of my way to avoid her, and I would only approach her within certain specific contexts. I would only, I'd be very deliberate and manipulative and strategic in when to ask her what. I want to borrow the car. I want to go to a friend's house for the weekend. I'll wait for the right mood, the right moment. I'll warm her up. I'll test her out. And then, if I think it's predictable that I'll get the outcome I want. Then I will ask the question that I'm really interested in. So yesterday, I watched a TV episode with the words guilt trip in the title. It was a Darren Brown piece. Fascinating. I love lots of Darren Brown's work that I've just recently really began to study. In the last few weeks, I've watched several of his British TV shows from the last 10 years. And there's a show called Guilt Trip. I forget the exact title, but Guilt Trip's part of the title, and I saw the whole episode yesterday, but just looking at the title, I thought immediately of my mom when I read the words guilt trip. When a person in distress is frustrated with other people's lack of response to them, they can experience resentment and then blame others for withdrawing from them. I'm going to be talking about my son's mom soon, I notice, as I get into this material. When a person in distress is frustrated with other people's lack of response to them, like my mom when I was a teenager, she might be experiencing distress. She's trying to talk to somebody. I'm there. She tries to talk to me, and I'm withdrawing. When a person in distress is frustrated with other people's lack of response to them, they can experience resentment and then blame others for withdrawing from them. They can experience frustration, resentment, blame, contempt, and so on. To blame others for withdrawing is one form of what is called a guilt trip. My mom said to me on one car ride, we were driving from Orlando to Tallahassee, which is maybe a 4-hour drive. In this car ride, so there's no, we're going to be riding together for quite a while. That's inevitable. We're kind of stuck. It's like being on a plane and you're sitting next to somebody. They're going to be, you're going to be sitting next to them for a while. And in the case of a car ride, it was actually even more limiting because I couldn't change seats. Couldn't request to swap seats with some other passenger. I was driving when I was driving, and my mom was in the passenger seat. My mom was driving part of the way, and I was in the passenger seat. We were stuck with each other. So we're on this trip, and she says something to me like, "Why don't you communicate better with me? Why don't you communicate with me?" or something like that. So to have that intensity of being together with someone, and then they say something kind of critical, blaming, they can lay a guilt trip, they can ask for, like, why are you such a bad person? Why are you such an asshole? They can do this but it's kind of abusive, really, right? To blame others for withdrawing is one form of what is called a guilt trip. We could call it abuse, a type of abuse. It might be maybe less intense than what we would call abuse, but it could be abusive. To blame others for withdrawing is one form of what is called a guilt trip. Again, it's entirely predictable that someone in distress might blame other people for withdrawing from them, because, like, if you're throwing a tantrum and then people run away from you, well, the tantrum was to probably attract attention. If people withdrawing, well, that's frustrating. The tantrum isn't working, and you might blame other people. Oh, they're just too selfish. They're just too, whatever. You start to condemn them and have contempt for them based on the frustration of them not responding how one values. So it would be predictable that someone currently in distress would suddenly, it would be unpredictable that someone currently in distress would suddenly speak of themselves as being responsible for driving other people away through their distress. The point of the distress is that someone is experiencing distress in order to attract a certain kind of attention and have someone else be responsible for them because they're in distress. They're having trouble with being responsible and producing the results they value. So I've been blamed many times by many people for withdrawing from them. I've withdrawn from lots of people and been blamed for it a lot. Many people have laid guilt trips on me for withdrawing from them. I've also laid many guilt trips, blamed many people, resented lots of things. I've also sometimes been sudden and abrupt in my withdrawing, which could be quite disruptive, right? Sometimes withdrawing is very disappointing to others, whether it's my mom or anyone else. Sometimes withdrawing, or me, when other people withdraw from me, I can be very disappointed. Sometimes withdrawing is very disappointing to others. violating their expectations, their hopes, disrupting their plans, even leaving complicated messes, revealing their old or persisting distress, or creating new triggers for distress and tantrums and resentments and revenge and guilt tripping and blame and animosity and contempt and competitiveness and criticism. Trying to share that distress, trying to ground that electrical energy of distress, that wild energy. When I was in high school, I withdrew from my first steady girlfriend when I realized that I was focusing on moving away to college and losing interest in that relationship with her. I withdrew gradually rather than crisply and cleanly and clearly. So it's kind of over a period of a few weeks. I was less responsive, returned her phone calls less quickly, called her less often, if at all, or didn't initiate calls necessarily. Maybe I would call her back if she called me, but I withdrew gradually. Later, I withdrew from my son's mom. In that case, I may have thought that my withdrawing might result in her affectionately chasing me. I'll play hard to get, and she'll have renewed interest in me. Let's try it. Well, it's worked before. In fact, it may have worked before with her, but in a particular case, it did not work with her. I withdrew. I was interested in her renewing her interest in me and affectionately chasing me, but she, at some point, did not respond to my withdrawal with an affectionate chase. Sometimes withdrawing produces a renewal of interest, and sometimes withdrawing produces tantrums, laying of guilt trips, whatever variety of other things. So eventually, instead of her gently chasing me, she crisply and clearly withdrew from me, or even pushed me away. But one time in particular was quite messy. It was clear and crisp, but it was not clean. It was messy, and it stayed messy for quite a while, not clean at all. Over the years since then, however, she and I have repeatedly chased each other affectionately, repeatedly withdrawn, and repeatedly resented the other, and so on. So I admit withdrawing from her. I withdrew from my son's mom. I withdrew from my mom. I withdrew from my first girlfriend, my first steady girlfriend in high school. I admit my experience of distress. Sometimes intense distress. You might call it hysterical or crazy. It's pretty intense distress sometimes. I admit that. I have also resented her, including intensely, like with contempt. And resenting is a form of fearing. So if I was resenting my son's mom, that was a form of fearing her response, pushing her away. Maybe with concern for my safety, and maybe a very valid concern. Maybe a excessive concern. Like when I say excessive, I mean like maybe a paranoid and overzealous concern. Maybe I overestimated the potential threat. But in some cases, it is safer to overestimate a threat and be safe. In some cases, it's safer to be safe. Better safe than sorry. So I resented her. I pushed her away. I withdrew. All the various things. Sometimes, perhaps, and producing results that were not what I actually valued most. But those were the actions that I took, and those were the results that I got. So I admit that she has also withdrawn from me, and she's also blamed me. I would say she's laid guilt trips on me. I'm talking about my son's mom here. We've had an enduring and powerful personal attraction, as well as several sudden and intense repulsions. And again, I couldn't necessarily say that my mom and I have had intense and sudden repulsions in the level of the kind of breakups and breakdowns and break-offs I've had with girlfriends, like your mother's always your mother. But definitely had some sudden variations in my interaction with my mom, some of which were, even though they were sudden, they were sometimes planned. Like I plan to move away, and everybody knew it was coming, but it was still it wasn't an abrupt change. It was just a swift, major change, right? Rather than a gradual transition. It was a major, big change all at once. So there have been withdrawing or repulsion or pushing away or any of those kind of things. And sometimes there's been resentment and frustration and turmoil and distress and so forth for myself, for my mom, for anyone. Like, I'm not saying this in particular, like, if you're not my mom, then I'm not saying this about her or about us. I'm saying this for you to have that introspective clarity about how your own experience might be similar to mine or to my mom's. So I've occasionally referenced proudly the fact that my son's mom has repeatedly chased me affectionately within the last decade since she and I first stopped living together. As well as proudly referencing that she has repeatedly responded to me when I chased her affectionately. So I was proud, like from a particular background of shame and embarrassment and fear. I've defensively pointed to her recurring affection for me, like her affection would somehow cancel the validity or intensity of her past withdrawing and distress and blame. What was I defending? I was defending my guilt at her not being a lasting priority in my life, and even me not being a lasting priority in her life. That was also very disappointing at times. So I was defending the sense of failure and my sense of guilt and fear of admitting the results that I'd produced. Maybe she was a lasting priority in some ways. Maybe I wasn't fulfilling on the value that I associate with her, and I knew it was possible. Maybe I wasn't fulfilling on it. I'm making this up on top of what I had written previously because that's something I think of just like right now. But we do have different priorities. They come and go in terms of the level of priority, the intensity of priority. My appreciation for someone, my interest in speaking them further and interacting, and like having a relationship with someone or a particular kind of relationship, whether it's romantic or friendly or business or whatever it may be. Those things flow. They begin, they grow, they recede, they grow again, whatever it may be. So there's kind of that sentimental, it's not really a distress, but there's that sentimental, maybe regret would be an accurate word for it. A little bit of grief. Could be a sense of frustration in the background, but not really prominent frustration. The frustration that's been there isn't so much here now. There's more of a sense of, well, I really would have liked for things to have gone differently, and just recognizing, wow, I would have really liked things to have gone differently. And when my son's mom and I have recurringly approached each other to resume our relationship in terms of our romantic and intimate relationship, co-residing and things like that, that's been an expression of our appreciation for each other, of our value for what we would like to have in our lives and what we're interested in having together. And it hasn't worked out to be a stable, steady relationship. So she and I both have that experience as something to acknowledge. Yes, we really sincerely wanted what we sincerely wanted, and we got something else. So I accept responsibility that she and my son have been huge active priorities in my life, though only sometimes. There have been other active priorities for me too, such as earlier in July, a few weeks ago, or even about 1 week ago, when late at night my neighbor was banging on my wall in distress. She was scared of her teenage son injuring her. So whatever problems I had and whatever concerns and priorities I had, I was still awake at this hour, I believe. But anyway, I got up and went out my door and knocked on their door and found out what was going on. I assisted her in promoting safety for her and her younger son. And actually, this was not just one night that this is one night in particular, but there was a sequence of disturbances late at night where I had even invited her to let me know if there was, if I could help or if she was in distress or whatever, let me know. So sometimes she knocked on the door, sometimes she pounded on the wall, and for several days now, no pounding on the wall, no knocks at the door, whereas everything is settled. And I've heard people over there. I haven't talked to anybody, but it seems like things have calmed down quite a bit. So she was scared of her teenage son injuring her, and she pounded on my wall late at night to get my attention. I assisted her in promoting safety for her and her younger son, who's 4 or 5 years old. So that also, me assisting her, also promoted tranquility in my environment so that I could sleep later that night without disturbance. I was aware that I was capable of providing some assistance and, would do so, or would attempt to do so, and was apparently relatively successful. But I also just wanted my my night to go quietly. I wanted a tranquil, undisturbed evening. So distress comes up, priorities come up, they arise, they subside. Distress arises, it subsides. No one has a monopoly on my priorities. No one has a monopoly on distress. Not my neighbor, not me, not my mom, not my son's mother. Everyone has the experience of distress arising and subsiding. Everyone has the experience of priorities shifting over time. Sometimes my sense is that certain people are craving for my attention, such as by throwing tantrums or laying guilt trips dramatically. Laying guilt trips is a way to kind of frame an interaction. When people lay a guilt trip on someone else, they're setting up a particular kind of interaction and seeing if the person's going to interact within that frame or not. Laying guilt trips dramatically, or guilt tricks. Laying guilt trips is a way to influence and guide the interaction, and it may result in a abrupt interruption, like a withdrawing. That's actually what my experience was with my mom on the phone recently. She made some reference to my son's mom and I abruptly withdrew. Actually, I don't know if I would say I abruptly withdrew. I think we were already about done talking, but I responded with a degree of assertiveness or even aggression, and then said, okay, well, that's about it. We can talk again another time. I could calm down from it, but I was responsive to the content she brought up, and it was intense, and there was some distress, maybe for her, maybe yes, I felt like she was pushing me, and I pushed back in that case. So then after I pushed back, I withdrew, and respectfully. So I've done a variety of things to attract other people's attention, throw tantrums, lay guilt trips, and so on. I've done those kind of things as well. I may have acted as a young child. Narcissism is like a developmental stage. A young child throws a tantrum, attempts to attract attention to itself through tantrums. This is relatively normal. Maybe not every well-nourished and well-supported child will throw tantrums. Maybe they will never have that experience, but it's not unusual for tantrums to be thrown. And at some point, people stop throwing them, or stop throwing them as much, because they're not fulfilling the priorities. So Priorities and distress, resentment, respecting, responsibility. I accept responsibility that my son's mom and I experienced both attraction and distress, both connection and repulsion, both resentment and appreciation, and so on. In fact, all of those aspects of life arise in almost all relationships in my life. Eventually, I experience attraction, distress, connection, repulsion, resentment, appreciation, and so on. Just the whole range of what's possible. That's what comes up. Do I expect that distress will ever permanently cease? That I will, at some point, no longer ever experience stress? No one around me will experience it. I won't experience it. There will be no stress in the world as of next Thursday. That's my target. Is that a realistic thing? Is that a realistic expectation? Perhaps not. That might be very disappointing to expect that distress will ever permanently cease. Buddha said something like, look, distress is part of life. Suffering is part of life. Life includes suffering. There's suffering in life. And then he went on from there. That was the first noble truth. Life involves suffering. Distress is part of life. That's the basic idea. Have I been habitually responding to any experience of distress by blaming someone for triggering distress in me? If I experience distress as my reflex, my first reaction, my habitual response to blame someone else for causing me distress. That's pretty common, isn't it? I'm in distress. Someone's around. I blame them. Let's say that I have a teenage son at some point. I do have a teenage son now, but he's early teen, so I wasn't actually thinking of him when I said that. But let's say he and I are driving, like he's of driving age, and we're driving somewhere. And at some point I say to him something like, why are you such a bad communicator? Or why don't you talk to me more? Or something like that. Well, I might experience distress and regret, sadness, sorrow, frustration at the interaction with him, and I may blame him for it. That would be the kind of thing that a lot of people would do. And that's a human response. That's one possible response, to blame someone else for one's own frustration. Now, when blaming someone for frustration, that tend to push people away further. That may tend to anger someone so that they actually penetrate through the guilt trip and respond with anger, with an intense assertiveness, and then withdraw, maybe calmly. But on a car ride, it's not quite as easy to withdraw. So you have that captive audience. So how do we manage distress, blame, and resentment? How do we integrate or cultivate respect, functionality, communication? Sometimes when I experience distress, I may withdraw, or blame, or repel, or write. I may go off into seclusion, which was kind of withdrawing, right? Or focus on, get a computer or get a pad of paper and start writing. Write a song, write a poem, write a letter, watch a TV show, whatever it may be. When people experience distress, they may respond in different ways. They may react in different ways. Some people eat excessively in response to distress. Some people drink excessively, like drink alcohol. Some people talk excessively, especially after drinking excessively. Some read excessively. Some excessively write. Some excessively breathe. I don't know. I'm just joking around here. What does excessively mean? There's no specific boundary between excessive and anything else, is there? What does excessive mean exactly? Well, I may have been excessively focused on my son's mom at times. Maybe I was excessively focused on my mom at times. I may have been naive about what results would arise from those focusings, from that priority. from my focus on my son's mom or my mom or anyone else. I may have been naive about what results were available and would arise. Or maybe that word excessively is entirely optional. More simply stated, I have been focused on my son's mom as much as I have, and as often as I have, and how I have, when I have, all that. I've been focused on whatever I've been focused on, my mom, my son's mom, my son, me, making this audio, writing, whatever it may be. I've been focused on what I've been focused on as much as I have, and as often as I have, in the ways that I have, and so on. I've had a variety of experiences result from my focus on my son's mom. Intrigue, delight, resentment, rage, appreciation, learning, repulsion, despair, guilt, stress, courage, joy, pride, grief, regret, and boredom. In fact, this reminds me of the time I was writing about my son's mom, and eventually I got so bored that I woke up and realized that I'd fallen asleep. Respect is possible. I can respect distress, I can respect contempt, I can respect animosity and boredom and fascination and lust and hunger and danger and safety and anything that I can respect. I can respect life. I can respect all of life. I can respect any part of life. I can respect whatever is possible. I can even respect things that are impossible or that are labeled impossible. I can respect language. I can respect certain aspects of life more than others. I can avoid certain things and focus on certain priorities. And then the priority and the focus can change. I can respect that the priority for some people at some time may eventually be whatever they are actually doing in that particular moment. If I'm driving down a highway and with my son who's 16 or 17 or whatever, or 18, and we're driving, and I say, man, I'm frustrated that you're not already talking to me right now. I wish you were already saying something to make me feel more comfortable and more at ease and less distressed. That'd be kind of weird. They may be listening to like their iPod or their headphones or whatever. They may be writing. They may be sleeping. Why are you always sleeping when I want to talk? Just because we're driving and it's 4 p.m. in the afternoon and you're tired. Why? Come on. This is an insult to me personally, isn't it? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I can respect that whatever people are actually doing in a particular moment is their priority at that time because they're doing it. That's the evidence that it's a priority to them in that moment. Now, they might be available to change priorities, to change focus. They might be eager to change focus and change priorities. They might be frustrated. They might be in a rut. They might actually find it difficult to get out of the rut, but very appreciative of any assistance in getting out of the rut. So, a priority for someone at some time might be to lay a guilt trip on me. That might be their priority. I'm riding down the road. 16, 17, 18, whatever I was. My mom's in the car with me. She's laying a guilt trip on me. That's her priority at the time. Okay. There it is. Huh. That's interesting. Or somebody might lay a guilt trip on themselves. They might say to themselves, silently or out loud or whatever it may be, I should have done what I wish now that I had already been doing. That I had already done. That's a guilt trip. I should have done what I wish now I'd already done. That's distinct from respecting and acknowledging and being responsible for the fact that I didn't do what I would be really convenient and awesome if I had done, but I didn't. Saying I should have is entirely optional, especially if you say it over and over and over again. I should not have done what I did. I should have done what I didn't do. Okay. And that could be someone's priority at a given moment, to lay a guilt trip on themselves. Or they may someone may find it a priority to congratulate me on my brilliant writing and share my blog. They may bang on my wall in distress. They may completely and utterly ignore me. They may lay a guilt trip on me. They may try and convince me that I should agree with them about their guilt trip that they are laying on themselves. I think of someone in particular when I say that. I think I'll not name the person's name, but a friend of mine, my best friend, I'll say that. My best friend sometimes will speak about himself in a way that I think, what the heck? What the hell? What? Why are you so diminishing of yourself? And then I might think, to ask that, I might say, it sounds like you're kind of diminishing of yourself, depreciating yourself, saying, you shouldn't have done what you did and you should have done what you didn't. Well, stop. Stop saying that. Let's look at what result you'd like to produce and how you can produce it. Are you ready for that? Are you open to that? You're open to responsibility? Responsibility is identify the priority and fulfill it. That's responsibility. So lots of people in my midst may be kind of, in that kind of guilty, depression, self-depreciating mode of distress. And one way to respond to distress is kind of to curl up and play gopher. Is that the right word? Play dead. That's a perfectly legitimate reaction. It may work very well, especially if somebody's been exposed to like really frightening situations. If you be quiet and be still and play dead, that may be the safest thing to do in some circumstances. So that's a great strategy to have available, to recognize it as sometimes the best strategy. However, there are other times when that is not the best strategy. That is not the best method or best response. So if someone's really relying on that strategy, it might be great to be interrupted in that, to be pushed out of it. Maybe to be yelled at, maybe to be gently but firmly challenged. Or say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question about that? Or do you mind if I give you some feedback about that? So distress can happen in all humans. Distress can happen. There's a variety of ways of responding to it. One response is to say, well, let's acknowledge the priority and explore alternatives for fulfilling on that priority. And that is what I'm calling the responsible response to distress, or the most functional response to distress. And in fact, that's always what's happening. People always have whatever awareness of priority that they have, and they're always doing the thing that seems to them like the best way to fulfill on their priority. And if we can get that and have that empathy for all people, if they're guilt-tripping somebody, they're doing it because that seems like the best thing for them to do. If they're withdrawing, they're doing it because that seems like the best thing for them to do. That may be really valuable to get, that people always do the thing that seems to them to fulfill on the priority that seems to them to be of most importance and most value. They may change their priorities, they may change their methods, but there always is a correspondence between someone's actions or even their inactions and what they see as what they value, what they see as a priority, whether they explicitly identify it or explicitly share it or whatever it may be. So playing dead, entirely valid. Laying guilt trip, entirely valid. Blaming others, resenting, making jokes, taking risks, making phone calls, writing songs, saying nothing, being aggressive, being violent, being calm, being fast, being slow. All of the different things. There's a purpose and a relevance and a functionality to everything under heaven, every purpose under heaven. This is a paraphrasing of Ecclesiastes 3. There's a time for love and a time for hate, a time for war and a time for peace, a time for putting things together and a time for separating things into their components. And there's a time for writing and there's a time for phone calls and there's a time for charging your phone battery and there's a time for turning your phone off. And all these things. There's a time for everything. There's a time for good, a time for evil. And that is about respect. About respecting the different possibilities. I respect that other people can respect whatever they respect. Whatever they are respecting. Whatever they're focusing on. I can acknowledge and focus on the fact that other people are focusing on whatever they're focusing on. I can respect that other people can respect whatever they respect. I can respect that struggling to attract the respect of other people is one of the most common results of distress. One of the most common methods of dealing with distress is struggling to attract the respect of other people. Not just attract their attention, but attract their respect. And I can respect that. I do that when I do that. Other people do that when they do that. They all want to attract respect. They want to attract value. They want to be seen as valuable. They want to be perceived as valuable. Who doesn't want to be perceived as valuable? Even sometimes people will go out of their way to kind of, what do you call it, diminish themselves or depreciate themselves. Even when they're doing that, consider that underneath the statement and the playing dead and all that stuff, underneath all that, people want to be loved. They want to be valued. They want to be respected. They want to be appreciated. They want to contribute. They want to connect. They want to thrive. They want joy and delight. They may even want a promise that distress can be permanently ended on the planet for humanity, for all creatures, for them personally. What if it's a lie that distress could be permanently ended? But what if there's a time and a place and a purpose for lying, telling people that distress can be permanently ended? All you have to do is come to this retreat or to course or chant this mantra or wear this necklace or whatever. Distress will be permanently retired. Was it Wednesday? Next Wednesday, distress will be permanently retired. So if you have any distress that you really, really think of as a priority to get over with between now and Wednesday, go right ahead, because distress will be permanently retired as of Wednesday. That's my promise to you. It may not actually be true. It could be a lie. But there is a purpose and a value for every purpose and value under heaven. That could be about the end. This. Wow. Writing, distressing, resenting, and respecting. As I said before, if you find some writing or audio or whatever brilliant and intriguing and fascinating and disgusting, then do what you see fit. That is sharing it or writing a review somewhere saying how horrible it is. Whatever it may be, feel free to give attention where you are giving attention, to respect what you respect, and to lie to people about how there could be a permanent end to distress for all creatures. No more stress, no more distress, no more suffering. Ever, 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 ever. No more broken promises. Now I'm starting to sound like a politician, aren't I? We promise never to break any promises. All right. So, here's to you and your future imaginary audiences, your future real audiences, your past imaginary audiences, and your past real audiences. Here's to it all. Much respect.